Our first panel is Mitigating Risks for All Cargo Operations. It's moderated by my friend Captain Rich Hughey, who serves as the chair for ALPA's President's Committee on Air Cargo and is an MD-11 pilot for FedEx. Rich's dedication to making our all-cargo world a safer place to work has been an inspiration to me, and I'm sure to many others in our industry. Rich, it's all yours.
Thank you, Captain Harrison, and good morning, everyone, both here in the audience and those watching online. The opening panel of the 2015 Air Cargo Symposium is Mitigating Risks in All Cargo Operations. The purpose of this panel is to begin the discussion on risk mitigation as viewed through the lens of Part 121, All Cargo Operations. I'm going to take a little time and cover a few slides and share my thoughts on risk mitigation, then I'll hand it off to our esteemed panel thereafter. Following their remarks, we'll open the floor up for questions. Commercial aviation, highly technical, system of systems, employed with defenses in depth to prevent accidents in both aviation safety and security. It didn't start that way. It evolved that way. And during that evolution process, we primarily learned through failure and then built defenses to prevent the last accident. Dr. Reason, the creator of the infamous Swiss cheese model of accident investigation, identifies latent organizational influence as one of the most important lines of defense. Defense against what? Is there a problem? Is there a problem with all cargo operations? According to the Department of Transportation, departures between 2004 and 2014 show that cargo encompasses 7% of the Part 121 pie. Measuring major accidents during that time frame, all cargo stands with 11, passenger with 5. Cargo has a significantly higher accident rate compared to passenger. So much so that if the respective accident rates were held constant in the same 10-year period, and cargo flew the 93% slice of the pie, and passenger flew the 7% slice of the pie, our passenger carrier friends would have 1 accident every 30 years. Cargo would have 12 accidents per year. We fly the same aircraft in the same operating environment, in that same system of systems called commercial aviation. We manage our risks the same way. Flying airplanes has always involved risk, and it's our job as pilots to manage them. We do it every day with weather, traffic, mechanical problems. We have those slices of cheese with regulations, procedures, equipment to counter many of the latent failures identified in Dr. Reason's model. But when all else fails, we have crew members team up as the last line of defense to prevent an accident. Even with the same experience requirements, the same training requirements, flying the same aircraft, what's different between passenger and cargo? Well, we have different operational environments. System form is for one. Cargo is primarily a hub and spoke system domestically, with 60% of that being at night. It's quite different than passenger operations that are point to point. A passenger aircraft spends about 35 to 40 minutes at the gate, while a cargo aircraft takes 3 to 5 hours conducting a hub turn. Flight time, the average cargo pilot accumulates roughly 27 flight hours per month. The average passenger pilot gets about 47 hours per month. This means cargo pilots get less approaches, instrument or visual, less landings, less time on task, that repetitive practice that makes us proficient. We carry different cargo, from MRAPs to polar bears to racehorses to race cars to whatever Amazon wants us to carry. And we also carry dangerous goods in a wider variety and more of. With the exception of lithium batteries, all DG is really mitigated with performance-based packaging, separation requirements, and density requirements, constraining so that the cargo fire suppression system is capable of containing the fire for a certain period of time. Aviation infrastructure, you think that would be the same, but the differences due to the time of day are affected by staffing of ATC services, both approach control and tower, and airfield rescue and firefighting, Many cargo pilots fly to airports across the U.S. conducting non-tower operations with little or no ARF response capability, and they're the largest aircraft that operates into that field. Passenger carriers have layers of security defenses both at the airport and on the aircraft. And passengers themselves have shown a willingness to act when a threat is posed to the safe operation of that aircraft. Cargo pilots don't have 100 people to fight for them behind the door. Lasers are a growing threat and mostly encountered at night when all cargo pilots are operating. It's just not a cargo risk, it's a commercial aviation risk, but cargo pilots experience it in a disproportionate manner. We have different regulations. You've heard about the dangerous goods discussion with Captain Knoll. Harmonizing USDG regulations to ICAO, we understand that, the idea behind that. But the question has been raised, is the organizational culture of the ICAO DG panel voting members capable of making safety decisions? Or will they simply vote on self-interest? The good news is cargo fire suppression and ETOPS for two-engine aircraft have the same regulations. However, three-engine or more have different regulations. Flight time, duty time rules, I won't belabor that too much. We understand that's been a discussion item for quite a bit. But a prominent sleep scientist put it this way for Part 117, as a passenger-centric effort that didn't necessarily give the time to the harder problem of flying at night through sequential night hub turns. I'm fortunate. At FedEx, our 2006 collective bargaining agreement instituted science-based rules to mitigate the hazard of fatigue, well ahead of Part 117. As previously mentioned, cargo aircraft are many times the largest aircraft operating in some of the airports in the U.S., carrying far more and wider variety of dangerous goods than allowed on passengers. The disparity is that there's no regulatory requirement for ARF concerning cargo operations. None. For security, part of an airport is a well-defended system, with another part having a different set of standards on a cargo ramp and for cargo aircraft and the people that work around them. Access to the cockpit is another issue, less regulatory restriction for cargo. Preventing another hijacking is high on everybody's list, and it's important. And cargo knows all too well about the insider threat. So the disparate regulation structure and operational environment combine to reach a precarious difference within our commercial aviation system of systems. As you might imagine, the regulations to the operational environment, the risk to all cargo operations, they add up. Many in our industry accept these disparities. It's the gradual process through which less safe or unacceptable practice or standards become acceptable. And as that behavior is repeated without really any catastrophic result, it becomes a social norm for the organization or industry. That's a human factors piece called normalization of deviance. It's not new, not in our industry. It's not new. It was at NASA, part of the BP oil spill, part of big coal, and the healthcare system. As disparate regulations made independently of one another combine within a unique operational environment, risk is accumulating for all cargo operators. Why has that happened? Was it because our industry has overused the cost-benefit approach to safety decision-making? You heard Captain Knoll earlier, the cost-benefit process must be changed and updated to utilize an SMS process of risk analysis to consider the aviation as a system of systems, not simply a type of operation. Its shortcomings have caused those impacted by past major accidents to seek solutions through legislation, where their voices can be heard and action taken in a more responsive manner. And last, has our tolerance for risk not changed with the changing hazards? Technology's changing, and some of those are influencing hazard changing. But these methods are not our first choices for mitigating risk in this complex, technical, well-defended system of systems. But we do have an example to point to. one that we should follow, because we see it right now. Excellence in safety performance is being done in the passenger carrier part of 121. They are proactive, data-driven, and performance-oriented. They haven't lost an airplane since 2009. And from a wide-body standpoint, they haven't lost one since 2001. They're leading the regulators, adapting to changes in risk tolerance, recognizing the impact of social media and the importance of social responsibility. If you don't think so, then why did they opt out of lithium battery carriage business while they're legal to carry? It was the freighters that had the hull losses, and the FAA test center data, was that enough to change their tolerance for that risk and carrying that hazard? So as passenger carriers ban this DG, the market forces will likely funnel them to those carriers that have not, thus increasing their volumes, thus increasing their risk. We have one part of the commercial aviation system affecting another, all within the same system of systems. So in conclusion, as you listen to our outstanding panelists today, think of the problems identified by the all-cargo safety performance disparity in that pie chart I showed you earlier. Think of the unique and aggregated risks facing all-cargo operators and their pilots, and how we might improve this 7% slice of the Part 121 pie so that we have an equivalent level of safety across the entire complex, technical, well-defended system of systems called commercial aviation. To my left, from the FAA, Mr. Steve Moates. Next to him is Michael Moody, and from the Cargo Airline Association, Steve Alterman, and last, from ALPA FedEx, Preston Greene. We're glad that Michael came as part of the USPS contingent to attend this event, so thank you very much, and thank you for the rest of you for being here as well. I'm going to hand the clicker and the microphone privileges to my friend, Stephen Moates. Stephen?
Is there a switch here?
No, I think it's on. Test, test.
Hello, yeah. My name is Steve Moates. I'm the branch manager for AFS 220, which is the Part 121 Air Carrier Ops portion of AFS 200, which is the Air Transportation Division. We're a policy branch right here in DC. We write the guidance, we write the 8900 language, exemptions, we end up writing the regulations. We're not in the direct enforcement, but we give guidance to the people who are doing the enforcement. And it's our responsibility to write the guidance clear, comprehensive, concise, and accurate. And we spend a great deal of time and effort getting to that position. Broadly speaking, and Rich brought it up yesterday in a telephone conversation, Peggy Gilligan, who's AVS 1, the Director of Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety, has a group. It's the Commercial Airline Safety Team, CAST. And that sits right at the top of the FAA safety hierarchy. And the CAST system uses ASIAS data to identify risks as far down the road as possible, and where we can focus our effort on risk to identify the risk and mitigate the risk. Now that has influenced the entire process of the FAA into a risk mitigation data-based organization. In risk management, there's a job for everybody. Nobody gets a day off. There's no free lunch. Every participant, operator, employee, FAA inspector, everybody has to participate. It's got to be a team approach because everybody's got to cooperate. It's a group effort. Not one person is totally, what can I say? Responsible is not the word, because there is responsibility, but one person can't intervene. It takes a group effort of spotting it. Somebody walks down a ramp, sees a load of cargo on a container or on a cart, sees a little leak underneath that cart, sees some fluid, doesn't say anything to anybody, passes it on. Next person gets it, they push that same load onto the airplane. Oh, it's leaking. Who knows what it is? Probably rain left over. Doesn't report it to anybody. The airplane takes off and you got corrosives leaking. that nobody spotted or did anything about. So everybody has to participate, and it's a cultural commitment to do it. Everybody is interdependent, and we must cooperate in what we're doing. There's no single unit that's going to correct or mitigate risks. It's to all of us. Primarily responsible are the operator and the safety management system that the operator employs. From them, the employees become the critical factor in the operator. Operator can have plans, but if the employees don't buy into the plans and the organization and the processes, the plans aren't going to go anywhere. Likewise, it translates over to the contractors and the vendors that the operator employs. They become effectively employees of the air carrier. Ultimately, the operator is responsible. And notice I put the regulators last. If it gets to us, it may be too late. Our job is to assist the operator in building the SMS profile, making sure the processes and procedures are in place, and that there's a way forward instead of the old investigative EIR reports and enforcement actions. We have to get ahead of it. Our objective, of course, is a safe and compliant operation. We have regulations which establish the bar. We have the guidance which my branch writes, ACs, 8900s, SAFOs. We got the tech center that does a great deal of research, and while we're talking about lithium batteries, they are the unit in the world that's doing lithium battery research. Everybody looks to our test center in Atlantic City as the source for all information on lithium batteries, far and away more than anybody else does. And from that, we're data-driven. We need the proof, the analysis, and then it falls to the SMS program for the operator, safety risk analyses, the processes and procedures, and within this, there must be, in the operator's SMS, a risk mitigation strategy, a way to identify the risk and a way to mitigate the risks. And the objective, obviously, has got to be forward-looking. I'll get to the cargo focus team later, but if we're looking back, correcting what took place, again, it's too late. We have to get ahead of a process that's extraordinarily dynamic. The job's never done. We can never, ever be satisfied. We have to continually evaluate and validate what it is we're doing as an administration and what it is the operator's doing through their SMS program and what it is organizations like ALPA are doing to assist and move the process forward. We got to have a commitment to discover what we don't know. We don't get to spike the football, ever. We're never done. And then we have to provide access to whatever knowledge we've gained, because we can sit on it and nobody gains anything. So we get into the SAFOs, the infos, the guidance, and as a result, well, that's the next slide. As Rich talked about the only thing that's changed in passenger operations over the last 20 years is the fact that we're all probably 10 to 20 pounds heavier than we used to be. But other than that, cargo or passenger operations are relatively stable. The only variance in passenger operations is going to be what's in the cargo compartment. Where are we? Well, we're talking cargo again. So that's where the variations will occur within the passenger operations. It's very stable. On the other hand, cargo operations change all the time. If you're flying a predictable route for FedEx or UPS where you got a load of containers each and every day and you're going from Memphis to Keokuk to Chicago and back, that might be considered a fairly predictable route, carrying the same packages from LL Bean to the distribution center. Other than that, when you get beyond the nice, I'll call it pretty freight, things change daily. Your loads will change. The manufacturer of the load will change. The freight forwarder will change. There has to be processes that the operator has to control what gets on the airplane and the quality of what gets on the airplane. Your destinations change. I don't need to say the operating hours change. The operational environment, who knows where you're going to be flying? flying in the U.S. or flying from Miami to South America, or flying from Ostend into Africa, or flying across Africa, flying into the Middle East. Everything that happens in the cargo operations, particularly in the supplemental environment, presents unique challenges minute by minute. And again, you've got varying manufacturers of the goods, you got the forwarders, you got buildup, and you have a lot of non-ULD freight. And then we get into special cargo, which Chairman Hart discussed. Special cargo is cargo that's not in a can, that's certified for use in the cargo loading system of an airplane, or a pallet net combination that are certified together and then certified for use on that airplane. A certified ULD actually becomes part of the aircraft structure. Everything else is considered special cargo. Shortly after the Bagram accident, the FAA convened a panel, a Tiger team, and almost immediately chartered what is now called the Cargo Focus Team. And the Cargo Focus Team is designed to exist as the permanent technical resource for cargo operations. And I believe over the last 2.5 years, that group has come to be probably the preeminent regulatory body for cargo operations anywhere in the world, because of the work they've been doing, the questions they've had to deal with, and the direction they have to go. John Duncan's, who's the Director of Flight Standards, his prime focus was it's very difficult for a principal operations inspector, principal maintenance inspector, to be intimately aware of the depth of something like cargo. That comes to us to write the guidance, but we need to support the POIs with as much information as we can. So the Cargo Focus Team is a resource for the principals. It's somebody they can call to include in the process of judging whether or not the operator is in compliance, whether or not there's something better to do, and how the system will work. It will also be an outreach group. Members are from the Air Certification Branch, AIR, got the Air Transportation Division, which is out of my branch, and we have the Aircraft Maintenance Division, and inspectors in the field. First thing we did was, well, not the first thing, among the first things we did was revise the AC 12085. That was begun after the Fine Air accident, and it was proceeding apace and ended up a pretty good document, but 2001 intervened, 9/11, and everything got sidetracked. So there were some holes in the 12085 that had to get patched, particularly relating to special cargo. Major changes that we put into 12085, it was a major rewrite, first in 10 years, as I said. And we have 5 new sections: the transport of special cargo, the use of multiple entities, meaning if you have a stager in a place like Bagram, who is that person responsible to? That's not the military. They're contractors at an outstation at 2 o'clock in the morning loading your airplane. So the use of those entities requires a great deal of oversight and commitment. Cargo staging, putting together that cargo, controlling it on a distant place on the planet without direct oversight by really anybody. The operator has to establish the procedures to take care of it, but frequently it's a difficult thing to get in touch with and get a hold of. Checklists and job aids are put in there so that, as Chairman Hart mentioned, we were short on guidance. So we've included checklists, job aids, and very specific guidance for inspectors. And then you've got the operator's evaluation system for weight and balance control. These are loading diagrams, which were weak, and we needed to enhance and beef up the amount of support. You can't expect a crew at 3 o'clock in the morning on the backside of the planet to be loading ugly freight without some sort of guidance beyond what they think they know. And then we include enhancements concerning the ULDs, training, and considerable improvement in the training. One of the things that we found lacking, every airplane is born into an AFM. AFMs talk about specific airplanes. When you go out on the ramp and you look at an airplane, that airplane is attached to an AFM, but it might be attached to it through a series of STCs. It might have 2 or 3 STCs on the same system, but it will eventually migrate back to the AFM. That AFM must be the basis for the air carrier's weight and balance program, weight and balance manual. Weight and balance manuals were being approved that were not in accordance with the AFM. And the AFM controls it all. And one of the holes we have found is that we need to attach the AFM to the specific airplane through its STCs. The air carrier has to load according to the weight and balance manual. The only FAA-approved documents are type certificates, supplemental type certificates, and the weight and balance manual supplement. When you go look in your flight crew operating manual, GM, wherever it'll say, the regulations require you to have a limitation section that reflects the AFM. Well, if you look at the limitation section of an AFM, it may have only 1 or 2 pages regarding weight and balance. You'll have an envelope. You might have some operating limitations, and that, in your limitation section of your manual, appears to be all there is to the weight and balance manual limitations. Well, what will state probably just below that weight and balance or the envelope, operating envelope diagram, is a statement that says refer to the AFM weight and balance supplement, which is about that thick. All the limitations applicable to that airplane and that AF sit in that weight and balance supplement. So there are considerably more limitations than appear in the limitations section of most manuals. And the operator is always ultimately responsible for cargo loading, securing, and the safety of the flight. The chairman mentioned training. We immediately got onto the job functions. Speaking of training as job function, and recognizing that there are different levels of training necessary. A load supervisor, load master, needs considerably more training than someone who's pushing the pallet onto the airplane or driving the K-loader. So we established criteria for function-based training, and a recurrent every 24 months, and of course retention of the current training. Got to have a closed-loop continuing analysis, evaluation, and surveillance system. And back to what I was talking about earlier, we're never done. You continue to review, you continue to move forward. We revised definitions and are now requiring a function called the SCAF, which is Special Cargo Analysis Function, that is required to provide the crew and provide the load supervisor, load master, person in charge of loading with a diagram of what the special cargo looks like and how it should be secured to the airplane. I'll move through this one. We're discussing an op spec for special cargo. We are going through a great deal of training, enhancing our cargo operations course in Oklahoma City, and providing inspectors with a great deal more surveillance tools. And we're performing various levels of outreach. We're unified efforts with the stakeholders. Boeing's heavily involved. They participate in frequent discussions with the cargo focus team. We've gone to their weight and balance workshop. They've given us all the information they possibly can. They're very transparent with us as far as what can be carried, and are quite supportive. We work closely with the Department of Defense, and we've given various presentations to National Air Carrier Association as well as IATA and essential ULD forums. With that, I'll pass it over to Michael.
My name is Michael Moody. I'm with the Independent Pilots Association. And first, I'd like to really thank Rich and all the folks at ALPA for inviting us to participate. I'm really looking forward to what people are going to say today, the questions that you have to ask. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart. I've been flying cargo for 25 years. I look like I'm 103 for a reason. You fly night freight, and it's not the easiest thing in the world on your body. Stephen just happened to mention Fine Air. I started flying freight at Fine Air, flying dirty old DC-8s out of Miami, anywhere you could think, carrying anything and everything you could think. Now I fly for UPS. They're prettier airplanes, a little bit cleaner, And it's a different operation, but at the end of the day, we're flying cargo. And you're going to hear some common themes for the issues that we're dealing with. And one thing I'd like for you to keep in mind is, why are we treating cargo differently than passenger operations? There's no reason for it. An airplane is an airplane. Once I close the door, if you have a door on your airplane, for the cockpit, it doesn't matter what's behind you as far as the safe operation of bringing that airplane someplace where it needs to go, and then you get to use it again. It doesn't matter if it's boxes or passengers. We need to have regulations that address the safe operation of the aircraft. If you do a Google search for the top 10 airlines, you'll get a chart that comes up, and it describes the top 10 passenger airlines. And for those of you in the cargo industry, have you ever been asked, oh, would you like to fly for a commercial airline? Get that quite a bit. I was looking at that chart, I realized that they were using some different metrics to decide what were the top 10 passenger airlines, and one of them was profit. And I realized that if you took the top 5 that were listed on the chart and added their annual profit, you still would not equal the annual profit that UPS makes every year. Over $5 billion in profit. Cargo aviation is a huge enterprise in our world. UPS moves 6% of this country's GDP every day. We move 2% of the world's GDP every day. If you add FedEx into it, you get some really large numbers pretty quick. We move 18 million packages a day. We're forecasting for Christmas this year, our peak day is going to be Tuesday, December 22nd. If you want grandma's cookies to get somewhere, you might want to ship them before Tuesday, December 22nd, because we're forecasting to move 36 million packages in one day, double what we do on an average day. And just to put that in perspective and how much cargo has changed over the last 10 years, 10 years ago, our peak day was 17 million packages. We move more than that every day. When I was asked to speak today, I was asked to bring a little bit of more insight into the safety issues that we are dealing with in air cargo. And you're going to hear some common themes. And I'm going to talk about 2 issues in particular. A fellow like Captain Knoll stole my speech when he was doing his opening remarks, so you're going to hear maybe a little bit of repetition. But lithium batteries and fatigue are the issues that we are dealing with as the biggest issues that affect aviation safety in our industry. In 2004, the Department of Transportation issued a rule, I call it an emergency rule, it was an interim rule, that prohibited the carriage of lithium metal batteries on passenger aircraft. And in justifying why they were doing that, they referenced an FAA technical report, which came out of the test center that Stephen was just mentioning. And I'll read a quote to you. More importantly, the report concluded that primary lithium batteries pose a unique threat in the cargo compartment of an aircraft because primary lithium battery fires cannot be suppressed by means of Halon 1301, the only certified fire suppressant system permitted for use in cargo compartments. The rule went on to specify that cargo aircraft were going to be excluded from this safety rule. Now, try and understand this. The Department of Transportation was saying that this product is so dangerous that we can't put it in a compartment that has fire suppression systems, but we're going to continue to allow it to be carried on aircraft that don't have any fire suppression systems. The aircraft I fly has 0 fire suppression systems on it, the main deck or the bellies. There are no regulations that require fire suppression systems on cargo airplanes. When I started working on this issue, a lot of the work being done here in DC, I was introduced to a phrase I'd never heard before: insignificant loss of life. On September 3rd, 2010, UPS Flight 6 departed Dubai for a flight to Cologne. Just 22 minutes into the flight, just shortly after getting to top a climb, they got a warning in the cockpit that there was a fire on the aircraft. In less than 3 minutes from the time they got the warning, they could not turn the airplane using the flight controls. In 5 minutes, they reported that they couldn't see their instruments because of the dense, heavy smoke in the cockpit. They couldn't change radio frequencies. 8 minutes into the event, Captain Doug Lampy's emergency oxygen system failed, and he got out of his seat to try and find some air to breathe, and he never came back. The airplane ended up crashing and both crew members died. Insignificant loss of life. Boeing and Airbus have recently come out and publicly stated carriage of lithium batteries is too dangerous on their aircraft. If an event happens, you're going to very rapidly exceed the design specifications of the aircraft. We know this already. I've been involved in testing for the last 5 years on lithium batteries. We know how dangerous they are, and we need to address the risk. We can't continue to ignore it. Now, I love lithium batteries. We all use them. They are a part of our lives that if they disappeared, we would all notice immediately. But we have to address the risk. It's unconscionable that we are going to ignore the risks because the headline isn't going to say that 200 people died. Life is precious. Whether you are an employee or a passenger should not matter. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about flight time, duty time, or fatigue. A published study found that American employers lose an estimated $136 billion a year due to fatigued employees' health issues, lost time. Another study found that night workers make 5 times as many mistakes as day workers and are 20% more likely to suffer a work-related injury. If you've been awake for 17 hours, studies show that you have the mental acuity of a person that has a blood alcohol content of 0.05. Does anybody know what the limit is for pilots? 0.04. And a lot of companies have regulations that's a lot less than that. If you've been awake 21 hours, you have the same ability mentally as somebody that's 0.08. I call that stupid, because when you're fatigued, you're stupid. You're not able to make complex decisions. You're not able to do complex tasks. You're not able to fly airplanes. Again, it doesn't matter if you're flying passengers or cargo. The NTSB has cited fatigue as a factor in at least 10 major accident investigations. Again, this is a similar theme as the lithium batteries. We know what the risk is. When the FAA published Part 117, in the supporting documentation, they had a few quotes, and I just want to read these. The natural circadian rhythms experienced by most people causes them to be naturally more tired at night than in day. It sounds so obvious, but it's important because some people believe that if you fly night freight, you can learn how to handle it. You can be trained how to be awake all night, and it's not an issue. Science doesn't support that. Flight crew members who fly during their window of circadian low can experience severe performance degradation. That's the FAA's own words. A series of studies analyzed the national accident rate as a function of the amount of hours worked has shown that after a person works for about 8 or 9 hours, and an editorial comment, most of this data was for people that were flying during the day, not all night, but after 8 or 9 hours, the risk of an accident increases exponentially for each hour worked. The FAA believes that Part 121 regulations do not adequately address the risk of fatigue. And one more. The Cargo Airline Association and a number of air carriers operating all cargo flights objected to the proposed rule and asserted that while a passenger operation accident could result in numerous fatalities, an all-cargo accident would consist primarily of property damage. I think we end up back with that phrase, insignificant loss of life. Is there any way that we can substantiate a system where an employee is worried on whether or not they're going to be able to go home to their family when they're done working? The only reason why I am not scheduled to fly 16 hours all night, as per the current regulations for a cargo pilot, is because we negotiated work rules that are safer than the regulations. Why do we have an aviation system where we're requiring the employees to negotiate for safety? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's something that's very real and personal to us at the IPA, as for all cargo pilots, but for us at the IPA, over the last 5 years, due to fatigue and also lithium batteries, each IPA pilot has had about a 1 in 600 chance of dying while doing their job. It starts to put it into personal terms. It's not just something that's discussed as a function of money. And unfortunately, we live in a world where money is very important to all of us, but the people that I talk to about this issue are either the people that are not coming home to their families potentially, or they're working on the issue because it's a function of money. We need to get past that. We need to sit down at the table, everybody together, and figure out how we can address the risks, because we already know what the risk is, and we cannot continue to accept it just continuing. Thank you very much. I look forward to any questions that you might have at the end.
I'm the target, so thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank ALPA for inviting me here today. I'd also like to thank ALPA for holding this. I think that half the time that we get real disagreements and fights that are unnecessary is because people don't talk to each other. And talking to each other is useful, even if we disagree. And so I really do want to thank Tim and the whole ALPA staff. And I work with a lot of you people a lot on various issues. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, but talking to each other is very important. I can tell you that, you know, sometimes we're in a position which is adversarial, and we yell at each other and scream at each other. I hope that's never personal. Sometimes we disagree, sometimes we agree. But those disagreements should never stop us from continuing the dialogue on issues of concern from the union end, from the end of the companies. Half the time, it's just miscommunication. So it's things like this that I think are important. And I'd like to, if I could, I'm not going to get into an argument on some of the issues. I mean, we're in the middle of, you know, the FAA is in the middle of a lawsuit over fatigue. We have a whole bunch of things going on. I'd be glad to answer any questions that anyone has, but rather than rebutting or attempting to rebut some of the issues here, I think I'd like to go back to the title of the symposium, and that's the Better Ideas for Cargo Safety and Security. I've looked at the program, and it looks to me like it's heavily weighted on the safety side. And so I'd like to talk a little bit this morning about security. Is there anyone from the TSA in the room? Good, I can talk about security. I think it's really important that security have the same focus as safety. They're one and the same, and they overlap a lot, to be honest with you. So I would like to talk about it. It seems to me that all of us have the same interest in making our aircraft secure. We need, as we go forward, to get together to talk about those issues. And in the security area, we actually have a vehicle for doing that, which has been established. It was established first by TSA on an ad hoc basis. It's called the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. It was set up by the Department of Homeland Security, run by TSA, but it was sort of ad hoc. It wasn't required. Last year, Congress passed a law that actually required TSA to have an Aviation Security Advisory Committee. And that now exists with 34 individuals from various segments of the industry. I'd like to note that there are 5 labor people on it. Bill Kaysen from CAPA is on it, Joe DePete from ALPA is on it. We have 3 other organizations represented, including some carpenters, and I haven't figured out why the carpenters are on it, but we'll take anybody to do that. And in addition to the full Aviation Security Advisory Committee, there are a number of subcommittees, and there is an air cargo subcommittee. I know Preston's on it. Just had a meeting yesterday, the day before. I lose track of time. And so there is a committee within ASAC that is looking at all cargo and air cargo issues. Not only all cargo, but cargo runs the gamut. Cargo in the belly of passenger planes, cargo in all cargo planes. And there is a subcommittee that deals with that, makes recommendations to the full committee, which then go up to the administrator. And I guess I should mention that Joe actually is the industry co-chair of the international subcommittee. And we appreciate that. The committee, when I first started on that committee, when I first recognized it, it met about twice a year. It was nice to put on your resume, made some general recommendations, and we don't know what happened to them. Things have changed a little bit. We may be the committee may be a victim of its own success, but what happened with that committee was, what triggered a major change in the committee was that the gun smuggling operation out of Atlanta, where people were able to get onto the airport grounds very easily to do all kinds of criminal and potentially serious things, triggered a congressional investigation. The congressional investigation went to the then acting administrator, and rather than dealing with it internally, the acting administrator turned it over to the Aviation Security Advisory Committee and said, okay, guys, you got 90 days, come up with a report, come up with recommendations. The ASAC formed a working group, separate part of, but not necessarily only made up of ASAC members. It got subject matter experts from the entire industry, and within 90 days, it was actually on time and somewhat under budget because they didn't get paid, came up with 28 separate recommendations on dealing with the insider threat and dealing with people getting onto the secure area of the airport that shouldn't be there. Those were delivered last April to the administrator. On July 8th, the administrator concurred with all 28 recommendations and is in the process now of implementing those recommendations. What has happened because of that and because of all the other issues surrounding security, the Aviation Security Advisory Committee has met, well, we have a meeting on the 20th of November. That will be the 6th meeting of the full committee. The subcommittees meet 2 or 3 times a year, either in person or by phone. And the working group that was established to talk about employee access met 9 times in 90 days in person. The gang is getting back together next Monday to assess whether they think TSA is doing a good job of implementation or not. So there is this mechanism for getting industry input into the security area in all segments of the industry, but air cargo is one of those. And so if there is anything that the TSA needs to hear that is sort of an industry issue, an overriding issue, not one that's necessarily regulatory where they put out an NPRM and you have comments, but things that are important to the industry that maybe can improve security. I have a pretty good relationship with the chairman of the ASAC, and you can let me know if you need anything there. I'd like to talk about a couple of issues, because when we talk about better ideas for air cargo safety and security, there are a couple of things going on that you should be aware of. One is that the legislation that established ASAC permanently required us to form a new technology subcommittee, security technology subcommittee. That has now been stood up. It had its first meeting in the last couple of weeks. I think that's important because technology is not where it should be and where it needs to be in terms of cargo. Whether that cargo moves on a passenger plane or whether it moves on a cargo plane. And this new technology subcommittee will be exploring ways in which technology can be advanced. And specifically, the Air Cargo Subcommittee has a working group on the same issue. It's focusing on what research is needed in the technology area to better secure the freight moving on both passenger and cargo aircraft. To be honest with you, the technology is not there to do what needs to be done. There have to be smart people out there that can do a better job in designing technologies that can better screen cargo. And the ASAC has formed organizations that can facilitate that. What we discovered was the industry had no impact at all and no input into the way in which the money is spent at TSA on their research and development, and cargo was simply being ignored. Everyone agreed that cargo was being ignored. That was one of the recommendations, one of the initial recommendations in the last several years that the ASAC made to the administrator, not the Air Cargo Subcommittee, but the full ASAC made to the administrator, is we need cargo input. And so that was a recommendation, and we have these things formed. Going to the other side of that coin, we don't have those technologies, so how can we get better at screening cargo? What's a better idea? And I'd like to go and suggest the low-tech solution to it as dogs, canines. Canines can screen cargo. They can sniff it. They can be trained. There aren't enough of them. And TSA has repeatedly said that we cannot use private canines to screen cargo, that they have to be TSA dogs, and TSA has to run the programs. The problem is there aren't enough dogs, there aren't enough resources. There are capabilities out there to have private canines screen cargo. It's being done overseas. It's not being done here. The ASAC has made recommendations that to TSA on more than one occasion that they should invest in and train and set the standards and have TSA set the standards and having private people have dogs that we can use to screen cargo. We get pushback from the agency bureaucratically. We are not going to let it die. We think this is a low-tech solution while the technology is not there, even after the technology is there. I get teased a lot because I keep telling people we're using the wrong animal. We should probably use pigs. Pigs actually have a better sense of smell. No offense, they're not unionized. And if everything goes wrong, you have bacon for breakfast. So, we can use animals, and we can use dogs. And by the way, pigs were rejected because the officers didn't want to be seen leading pigs on a leash. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd like to mention, and I'll wrap up with this, and then take any questions you want on any subject, is something called not ASAC, but ACAS. And I get dyslexic about this, so excuse me. It's the Air Cargo Advanced Screening Program that the express carriers, specifically UPS and FedEx, have piloted in conjunction with CBP and TSA to try to find out as much as we can about every shipment at the earliest possible time in the supply chain. So there's a program that's been running now for 5 years. It is still a pilot program because the bugs have not been worked out. It's very, very complex, and the bureaucracy keeps getting in the way. But it will force, there will be rulemaking from CBP, all carriers to submit the data on each of the shipments that they get to CBP for screening at a very early time in the supply chain so that CBP can spot anomalies, and then TSA will tell people how to screen it and what to do. And in the worst case scenario, do not load the freight because it creates a danger. In the 5 years, we haven't had a do not load, but we've had many, rescreened because they're anomaly type situations. That's a program that we have to push forward. We have to push forward internationally. We have to push forward as quickly as we can. We need to know as much as we can about the freight that's on the plane and the people who are shipping it. And both of those areas have to be updated, and we have to move forward with that. Our express carriers, FedEx and UPS, are further along in that, frankly, than the rest of the industry, because we control the freight from beginning to end. When you put the freight forwarders in the process, when you put other agents in the process, it's more difficult, and that's holding things up a little bit. But those are unique things in the security area that the industry is doing in conjunction with the government and outside the government, that we think are sort of out of the box, even though things like dogs have been around forever. We need to expand the use of them. And any other ideas that people have, I'd certainly be glad to hear about them, and you're perfectly welcome to come to us at any time. Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Preston and I set up where I would kind of pitch him a question, and he would frame up the answer off of my question as the way he would do a presentation for his subject. So, Preston, we're very familiar with the layers of security on the passenger side as we, as self-loading cargo, get onto those aircraft and safely move about. What does that look like on the cargo side for layered security on a ramp and the people who have access to the ramp and the aircraft?
Captain Hughey, thank you very much. Yeah, the layered security that's on the all-passenger side is a very well-structured process. And with their AOSSP, their standard security procedures, that system has worked very well. After 9/11, those things that then made up a complete and comprehensive security veil went into play. We ended up with the ability to control all the things that went into loading passengers, loading cargo, and loading baggage. And we funneled that process through a means to be able to get those things screened appropriately. If it couldn't get screened, it didn't go on the airplane. You had your SIDA, which is the identification display area, that security veil that was created. It created protocol for security that was for perimeter, portal access, for portal departure. It also then, most importantly, took and made it unescorted means to be able to get background checks for people that needed it. Those folks that walked around the airplane that did unescorted process then got a 10-year background check. As you move forward to what the airplane had, the airplane has a hardened door, an intrusion-resistant cockpit door. It has procedures, people in procedures that then provide security levels for us on the airplane. And then we added into that the LEO, the FAM, and the later effect that you had with the new training that was done by their common strategies that was developed by the TSA. All those things create this Swiss cheese slide that we saw that would make it very hard to be able to get all the holes lined up to be able to get a threat that would then be mitigated into a real attack. With that, whenever you look at the cargo side, we have virtually none of that. We do have, as the years went on past 9/11, the ability to start developing a SIDA area in the areas we were across from the commercial side, on the other side of the airport where nobody ever saw us, and the SIDA requirements weren't there. By 2012, that veil had to be put into place, and they started then trying to mitigate that for us on the cargo side of the airport. So you end up with the SIDA is there. That gives us some protection as we're moving cargo in, but you'll have an 18-wheeler that comes through, right through the fence, through the SIDA, rolls in there, unescorted person that you would expect to be able to, that's touching the cargo, pushes it right onto the roller decks, onto the airplane. And those are some of the areas that we forget about is We have a very structured process for passenger, but not so much for the cargo side. Once you get on board the airplane, some of the airplanes don't have hardened doors, as we call them in the industry. And the hardened door gives you one very important piece, a reactionary gap. You need to have a time to be able to respond. Just the other day, I went as a stakeholder to the FFDO meeting by which then we were able to integrate with the FAMs. First time it's ever been done. They were able to show us in their mock how they do their training. But then most importantly, they also showed us a scenario. And we were able to integrate with them, train with them, if you will. And what we found is that their model and our model, what we were going to do, how we were going to react as that thing progressed was different. How they were going to process their protocols and how they're going to control that environment, and how we were then in the front, the flight deck, deal with the airplane. And when you came up with it, we were not on the same sheet. What you have to do is realize that there's a reactionary gap that gives us, if we got a hard door, then we have something we can work with. If there's no mitigation in the back and somebody then has the approach to the hardened door, remember, it's a intrusion resistant door. That does not mean that it can't be breached. And just as you have a lithium fire that gives you a limited amount of time to put that asset on the ground, you also have the same thing with a door. Without the door, you have no reactionary time. It makes it very hard. So whenever you look at the overall structure of where we're going with in cargo side, we probably need to look real hard at how we're going to then mitigate that risk and that threat, and also be able to get that into our common strategies.
Thanks, Preston. With that, the aircraft that don't have hardened doors, what mitigation efforts do we employ for protecting that aircraft?
That we have in our fleet, and obviously UPS has their operational fleet, and ours is a little bit different. Though all cargo, but we do have a little bit different. We do have some airplanes that do have hardened doors in FedEx. And under that, we have some now that we're buying that don't have hardened doors. And with that, you would expect that we'd then look at what we're going to put on that aircraft to be able to mitigate that. In other words, we have on our hardened doored airplanes 121-583 that then helps us then have handlers that come on board that we can mitigate some of that by keeping them behind the hardened door. They have to have, for the right reasons, the ability to have access to the animals or that they're tending, and the ability to communicate effectively with the crew, and if they have any controlled substance items that they need to be able to mitigate with the animal, they have to have access. But it's a controlled process. Those airplanes without hardened doors, if you allow those handlers on board, then you won't have the ability to have that reactionary gap. You won't have controlled measures that are in place for those people that come aboard. You want to have those people that are then handling the animals to have a background check that's vetted, viable, controlled in the process to be able to get to the captain so that he can vet them when they walk on board the airplane. So then for operations like UPS, they still move animals, but they do it through a subcontract. So they work under 121-547. They don't have hardened doors, but then they don't allow themselves to be in a compromised position for that. But you have to look at how we're going to be able to deal with the insider threat and the person that's not supposed to be on the airplane, and how we're going to be able to mitigate that piece.
So that kind of leads me to what you'd said earlier about common strategy. We're very familiar with the common strategy employed on the passenger side, but what do we have as far as a common strategy on the cargo side?
What we had just received in the process of review was a common strategy that was really the all-passenger common strategy. And it was proposed for the full all-cargo because of the harmonization process that the TSA is working on right now. Which means that everything that was listed in the common strategy for the full all cargo was exactly the same for the all passenger. And again, the theme was based upon three things: a hardened door, people, and procedures. Well, that doesn't work for an airplane that doesn't have a hardened door. We have this issue that we just mentioned as my example, the horse handler. And we have, within FedEx, we have a means for receiving vetted information about the handlers that come aboard. And we have protocol in our FOM for receiving those people. Corporate security receives them and brings them out to the airplane, and we then vet them at the airplane and then move on. If it's done on a hardened door airplane, it makes good sense. You can use the hardened door as your reactionary gap, as we talked about. But if we end up continuing to build new airplanes coming off the assembly line that have no hardened door, we're going to have to look at how we're going to then mitigate that threat and that risk. So the common strategies, if we work with the TSA to be able to come up with that, we can go to the airplanes and look at and develop those TTMPs that will then go into the common strategies for us. That's something that we'd like to be able to do in the future, and we've addressed that issue with the TSA. Right now, what we're going to have in our possession is just the common strategies for all passenger. We're going to have to live with it. It goes into effect today. With that, the types of training that's available through that common strategy on the all passenger side is well dictated. But on the cargo side, it's left up to interpretation, and there's ambiguity in the process for each individual company to build to implement. Like Vision 100 happens to be an item that's on the all passenger side that then gets more into depth types of training that's required to mitigate types of threat as it escalates within the cockpit or the tube of the airplane. In our case, it's just listed under the full all cargo SSOP is you can reference it. Well, does that make it into training? Probably not, because it's a cost factor based upon how much you're going to make it for your training program each year. And the same thing for the TSA provides a crew member self-defense type training that has integrated behavioral issues. Makes good sense for the all passenger side. Yet it's not a requirement for the cargo. Now it's a voluntary thing, and at FedEx we've integrated that as best we can from the ALPA side to get those types of training events on property. But it was a big deal to do so. But those are the things that need to be implemented and grow into that common strategy as we move forward.
Very, very good. Thank you. I'm sure if you guys looked at your newspapers this morning, probably the headline spoke to an IED on the Russian passenger carrier that crashed over the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Preston, have IEDs been an issue on cargo aircraft before?
Yes, they have. And of course, there was an NPRM that was issued some time ago in the federal reg in 2004, whereby the TSA addressed two important issues for the entire aviation system, but most importantly, the things that they felt was most probable for the future was a hostile takeover of cargo aircraft and it to be used as a weapon. In addition, the other thing that was most telling was IED use on an all-passenger airplane for the process of taking that aircraft out of the sky. What Captain Hughey has just talked about is probably the case on the Russian airliner. Before that, 2010, we all heard about the Yemen plot by which that and a cartridge bomb scenario that was put into the supply chain that came out of Yemen, went into the European footprint, and then was to be loaded onto airplanes to go to the United States. The key issue with that is that they did find that device. It was multiple devices that were put in the supply chain. Had it not been for the human intelligence that was used, that device, multiple devices, would have made it into the supply chain completely. And it was so much so that had it not been for the human process, not technology, just as it was discussed earlier, had it not been for them to tell them exactly what box it was in and that they needed to take it apart to be able to see it, that's whenever they found out exactly what it was. A true IED, fully armed, capable of taking down the aircraft. And it was set for time. So had it been loaded on its final leg, it would have gone off and it would have taken that airplane out of the sky, or those airplanes. So we know that the bad guys are going to be looking and doing their process, their due diligence, if you will, to be able to figure out what the vulnerabilities are. And we've seen through the years what events that they've done. The Randy Youssef, the Bajanka plot was just that. It was a pre-9/11 event, but it was for them, the bad guys, figuring out what net explosive weight is required to take down an airplane. That's what it was. And they put the process of going from metallic type explosives, military type explosive, to non-military. As you go forward after 9/11, obviously everybody knows about the Richard Reed, the shoe bomb. After that, the underwear bomb. And then this recent one that I just talked about, which was the cartridge bomb. Each one of those caused something to change. We ended up, as we all know, standing in line taking off our shoes. Standing up with our hands over our heads, being screened. Them checking pace in peace for explosive sniff. All of those things were as a result of each one of those things that I just mentioned. So we're reacting. We react to that issue. Now we just see in the news about the jet airliner being taken down. And we also know that there's insider threat that very well could then also take over an airplane. So these things about mitigating this risk is something that, in security side, if you want things that make me stay up late at night, that's it. Worrying about those two issues. And I think that we should then work more towards having a comprehensive means of what is done for the all passenger makes it to the all cargo.
Thanks, Rich, for the panel. Did you have any last words?
No, I just wanted to thank the panelists for their participation and willingness to step up and have this discussion. We appreciate it very much.
You know, what a great beginning for a great first panel. It's going to set us up sort of in a broad brush way for what's coming next on the next three panels. So you guys, I can't thank you guys enough. Very, very great panel.